Large language models are everywhere. They can be remarkably accurate in some cases, but they can also be inaccurate in other cases. Today, I want to introduce you to a framework designed to enhance their accuracy and keep them up to date. That is Retrieval Augmented Generation, RAG. Let us focus on generation aspect for a moment and set aside the retrieval augmented part. In this context, generation refers to large language models, that is LLMs, that produced text in response to a user's input known as prompt. However, these models may sometimes exhibit undesirable behavior. Let me share you a very little story to explain this. Recently, someone asked me which country on earth has the most oil reserves. And I responded with, that's a great question. It's Saudi Arabia. I remember reading an article that stated Saudi Arabia has the most oil reserves. So I assumed that was the correct answer. However, there are a couple of issues with my response. First, I do not have a source to back up my claim, even though I confidently said that I read an article, so I know the answer, but I did not actually provide any evidence to support it. I'm answering this from my memory as I remember it. But I have not, followed this topic for a while. So my response is slightly outdated. That presents two issues. First, I do not have a source to back up my answer. And second, my information may no longer be accurate. These are both common challenges when working with large language models. They highlight typical limitations of LLMs. What happens if I had paused for a moment and checked a reliable source, maybe or some opaque document first? Then I could have confidently said, oh, I see the answer is Venezuela, which has the most oil reserves. And actually, this might change in future as well as we continue to discover more oil in the polar region with more and more ice melting due to global warming almost every day. But the fact is, I have based my response on something more credible, that is OPEC dataset. I have not fabricated or imagined an answer. Well, how would a LLM respond to this question? Let us consider a scenario where a user asks a LLM about oil reserves. A large language model might confidently respond, based on my training data, the answer is Saudi Arabia. However, that answer is incorrect. The issue is that the model does not actually know the correct answer, it simply predicts based on its training. Now, what happens when we introduce retrieval augmented capabilities? This means that instead of relying solely on the model's internal knowledge, we integrate an external content repository, allowing it to retrieve and reference more accurate, up-to-date information. This system can function like the open internet or be restricted, similar to maybe a curated collection of documents, policies, or maybe some other content. But the key idea here is that before generating a response, the LLM first queries a content repository asking, can you retrieve information relevant to the user's question? With this retrieval augmented approach, the response is no longer based on the model's pre-existing knowledge. For example, suppose user submits a query to the LLM. Traditionally, a generative model would analyze the prompt and generate a response based on its internal knowledge. However, with this RAG approach, the model first retrieves relevant external information before constructing its answer. In the RAG framework, the generative model follows this instruction that, wait, first retrieve relevant content. It combines that with the user's question and then generates the response. The process now involves three steps basically, that is the instruction, the retrieved content, and the user's question. This approach allows the model to provide evidence supporting its response. Now, regarding the two challenges that I mentioned, RAG addresses the issue of outdated information. Instead of retraining the model every time new data is available, the system can simply retrieve the latest information and use it without needing a complete model update. Essentially, you enhance your data store by adding or updating information. This way, the next time user ask a question, basically you are prepared to provide the most current data. As for the second issue, that is, source, the large language model is now being trained to prioritize primary source data when generating its response. In fact, being able to provide evidence now makes it less likely for the model to produce hallucinated responses or leak data. This is because it's less dependent on the information that it learned during the training alone. It also enables the model to adopt a very positive behavior, such as knowing when to say I do not know if a user asks the question. If it asks a question that cannot be answered reliably based on the available data, the model should admit it instead of fabricating a convincing but misleading answer. However, this approach can also have downsides. If the retriever is not efficient enough to provide the model with the best, most accurate information, the model might fail to answer a question that could be answered with the right data. This is why many researchers are working on both the aspects. They are improving the retriever to supply the LLMs with the highest quality data and refining the generative part so the model can produce the most accurate and comprehensive response for the user.